The General Slocum had passed inspection. 41 days later, it was burning in the East River with more than 1,300 people aboard. The life preservers were supposed to be the last line of defense. But when passengers reached for them, many were rotten. Some tore open, some lost their filling, some became weight, not rescue. So the question is not only why a steamboat caught fire on June 15, 1904. The sharper question is how a boat full of families could pass through a safety system and still carry equipment that failed at the exact moment it was needed. The disaster began before the first smoke came up through the deck. It began in the inspection certificate. It began in the storeroom. It began in the quiet assumption that an excursion steamer could carry thousands of lives if the paperwork looked complete. On paper, the General Slocum was legal. In the water, it was a trap. The boat was a side-wheel excursion steamer built in 1891. It was long, wooden, and made for pleasure trips around New York Harbor and nearby waters. The Federal Commission later described its upper works as light wood, painted and varnished many times, and highly inflammable. It was licensed to carry 2,500 passengers. That number matters. It meant the law imagined the Slocum as a vessel capable of holding a crowd larger than many theaters. But the same report found that the design gave almost no real consideration to fire. There were no fireproof hatches, no fireproof bulkheads, no meaningful barrier between a fire below and the crowds above. The ship was not unusual enough to be dismissed as a freak. The Commission warned that many similar vessels were operating in American waters. That is the first uncomfortable fact. The Slocum was not an outlaw boat hiding from regulation. It was a regulated boat showing what weak regulation could approve. On the morning of June 15, St. Mark's Evangelical Lutheran Church chartered the General Slocum for its annual excursion. The passengers came largely from the German-American community of the Lower East Side, a neighborhood often called Little Germany. The trip was supposed to go from the East River toward a picnic ground on Long Island. The New York Public Library records the passenger count as 1,358 plus crew. Most passengers were women and children. The pastor, Reverend George C.F. Haas, was aboard with his congregation. Later newspaper coverage identified him as one of the faces of the disaster because he lost members of his own family. That detail is not here for sentiment. It tells us what kind of voyage this was. Not a commercial commute, not a military transport, a church outing, a floating neighborhood. And this is where the story narrows from tragedy into mechanism. The warning was not a single ignored letter. It was a whole service that had normalized shallow inspection. That normalization entered the Slocum through the objects people trusted most: hoses, lifeboats, life preservers, drills. Before the passengers ever boarded, the rescue plan had already become partly fictional. The fire appears to have started below the main deck in the forward part of the vessel. The Federal Commission placed the origin in the forward cabin, a space that had once been a cabin but had become a storeroom and lamp room. That distinction matters. A passenger cabin suggests people. A storeroom suggests materials. The report describes a space connected to the ship's steering engine and dynamo and divided by wooden bulkheads. Other contemporary accounts differed on the exact spark. Some pointed to oily waste, some to a match or cigarette, some to spontaneous combustion. The exact initiating trigger was never proven with the certainty a modern investigation would demand. So the episode does not need a fake solved mystery. What can be proven is more important. The fire began in a vulnerable forward area of a wooden excursion boat. It found fuel, it found air, it found varnished wood, and once it had headway, the Commission believed it could not be controlled. That is the second uncomfortable fact. The spark is uncertain. The catastrophe waiting for it is not. The first attempts to fight the fire exposed the inspection failure almost immediately. Crew members tried to use the fire apparatus. Accounts and later summaries report that hoses failed or burst. The Commission examined the condition of the firefighting equipment as part of its investigation, because a ship fire is not automatically a mass casualty event. A small fire becomes a disaster when the systems meant to contain it fail one after another. On the Slocum, that failure chain was short and brutal. The fire was forward. The passengers were above and aft. The boat was moving. The wind and speed helped drive flame and smoke along the vessel. Captain William H. Van Schaik did not immediately land at the nearest possible point. He later defended his choices by citing dangers along the shore, including combustible structures or tanks. The commission still faulted decisions made during the run. For the viewer, the key map is simple. The Slocum moved north in the East River. The fire moved aft through a wooden superstructure. The passengers moved away from it. Every movement made the stern more crowded. Every minute narrowed the choices. There is a moment in many disasters when survival still appears to be a matter of action. Run here, launch that, put this on. But on the General Slocum, the available actions had been quietly weakened before the emergency began. The lifeboats were on the hurricane deck. The federal report placed lifeboats and life rafts there in its description of the vessel. But survivors and later investigators found that access and readiness were not what a passenger would imagine from the word lifeboat. Some boats were difficult or impossible to launch in time. Some were burned before they could help. The life preservers were worse. They were supposed to convert panic into survivable time. Instead, many became proof that the inspection had not looked deeply enough. The federal record and President Roosevelt's letter describe a separate scandal involving the non-pareil cork works of Camden, New Jersey. The Department of Justice secured indictments against the manager and 3 employees for putting cork blocks into the market with pieces of bar iron inside them. Roosevelt called the offense so severe that he struggled to comment with restraint. That does not mean every death can be placed on one manufacturer or one hidden bar. It means the safety chain extended beyond the boat. A life preserver passed from manufacturer to owner to inspector to passenger. At every handoff, someone could assume the previous link had done its job. On June 15th, that assumption entered the river. The Slocum's life preservers had another problem: age and exposure. The commission examined life-saving apparatus and found equipment that did not perform as life-saving equipment should. NYPL and historical summaries describe rotten cork and unusable devices. The important point is not only that the life preservers were bad, it is that they look like safety until they were tested by water. That is the cruelest kind of failed protection. It does not merely disappear. It invites people to trust it first. The crew was also unprepared. The official and historical record repeatedly points to weak or non-existent fire drills. Van Schaik was later convicted of criminal negligence for failing to maintain fire drills required by law. Crew training matters because a shipboard emergency is choreography. People need assignments. Hoses need pressure. Lifeboats need hands. Passengers need direction. Without that choreography, a crowd becomes its own obstacle. The Slocum carried a community, but it did not carry a working emergency routine. Therefore, the fire did not have to defeat a trained system. It had to defeat a set of names on paper. As the boat approached North Brother Island, the physical trap became visible. The forward fire had pushed passengers toward the stern and upper decks. The shore was close enough to see, but not close enough for many to reach safely. The water around Hell Gate in the East River was not a calm swimming pool. Many passengers were in heavy clothing. Many could not swim. Some jumped because the flames were worse than the river. Others were forced by crowding, collapsing rails, or collapsing deck structures. The federal report and contemporary newspapers record the collapse of parts of the vessel and the desperate movement toward the stern. The exact path of each person cannot be reconstructed. It should not be invented. What can be reconstructed is the geometry. Fire forward, crowd aft, water below. Failed equipment between them. That geometry is the disaster. Rescue came from several directions. North Brother Island housed Riverside Hospital, and people there responded as the burning steamer grounded nearby. Boats in the river moved towards survivors and bodies. The New York Historical Society finding aid records that the Department of Corrections ferry boat Massacre earned 4 congressional medals for rescue and recovery work, and identifies several crew members connected to that effort. That matters because the disaster was not a story of nobody helping. People did help. The problem was that rescue arrived after the ship's own protections had failed. External bravery was forced to compensate for internal neglect. By then, the casualty scale was already beyond ordinary response. The commonly cited final death toll is 1,021. The New York Public Library uses that number and gives 321 passenger survivors from 358 passengers. The Library of Congress guide describes over 1,000 dead, mostly women and children. Some older accounts and official categories vary, partly because casualty counting after mass death was difficult and because different agencies counted in different ways. That uncertainty should be named, not hidden. For narration, the safest statement is this: more than 1,000 people died, and the final commonly cited toll is 1,021. Most were women and children from the Lower East Side's German-American community. The disaster devastated Little Germany. NYPL describes the German-American neighborhood as radically altered afterward. Village preservation connects the loss to the neighborhood's migration and transformation. But even here, the script should be careful. The Slocum did not single-handedly erase a neighborhood in one morning. Migration, urban change, and other pressures were already at work. The fire accelerated a breaking point. It turned demographic change into grief. That is a more honest claim and a more human one. After the disaster, investigations moved quickly. A federal commission was formed in June 1904. It held hearings, reviewed testimony and exhibits, and issued its report in October. The report did not treat the fire as a freak accident. It examined the vessel, the equipment, the crew, the inspection service, and the law itself. Its conclusions are the backbone of this episode. The port's inspection work was not adequate. The supervisory structure had failed. The design of wooden excursion steamers needed reform. Safety appliances needed stronger standards. Crews needed proper discipline and training. The report's recommendations were not abstract. They were an admission that the rules had allowed danger to look official. Criminal cases followed. The captain, company officers, inspectors, and people connected to defective cork entered the legal record. But accountability narrowed. Van Schaik became the central convicted figure. He was found guilty in 1906 of criminal negligence and sentenced to 10 years. He served only part of that sentence and was later pardoned. NYPL states that the Knickerbocker Steamboat Company and its president, Frank Barnaby, escaped justice. A federal court opinion from the Slocum cases shows how prosecutors framed the allegations. Deaths tied to unserviceable life preservers, unfit pumps and hose, and failure to discipline and train the crew. That legal framing is useful because it shows the disaster was understood as a chain, not one spark, not one bad turn of the wheel. Life preservers, pumps, hose, crew discipline, inspection, ownership. Each link could be argued in court. Each link had a document trail, and still, most public memory reduced the Slocum to a burning boat. That reduction is part of why the disaster faded. Before September 11th, it was often described as New York's deadliest disaster. Yet it never held the city's memory with the force of later events. There are reasons. It happened before radio and television could fix images in national consciousness. It struck an immigrant neighborhood already changing. Its victims were mourned intensely but locally. Its reforms were absorbed into bureaucracy, and its central lesson was uncomfortable. The Slocum did not expose a danger outside the city. It exposed a danger inside ordinary civic trust. The final reconstruction is therefore not a line from dock to fire to island. It is a stack. At the bottom, a wooden excursion vessel built for crowds and vulnerable to fire. Above that, a forward storeroom where the exact spark remains uncertain. Above that, firefighting equipment that could not control the first minutes. Above that, life-saving equipment that could not be trusted. Above that, a crew without the practiced routine needed to move a crowd. Above that, an inspection service that had accepted too much on site. And above all of it, a neighborhood that believed a legal boat was a safe boat. That belief is what the General Slocum destroyed. The fire did not need to be mysterious to be revealing. The cause of ignition may remain uncertain, but the cause of inevitability is written across the record. The General Slocum disaster did not begin when smoke appeared below deck. It began when safety became a formality. By the time passengers reached for the life preservers, the real emergency had already happened. The emergency was that no one had made sure they would work.